Information about the world of running, inspiration to fuel passion and excellence, and ideas for making connections and finding community. You're listening to AtoZrunning. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of AtoZrunning podcast. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach. And before we get started with the episode, Andy, I think you should tell everybody about how you melted and died on your long run this weekend in Kentucky.
So I had a 20-mile run in Kentucky, and I'm just going to preface it. You don't need the whole story, but I had a 5-page script that I was memorizing. I recorded it on my phone, and it was downpouring during this run. And I was just running to this park where I was doing some loops around and around. It's actually called the Louisville Loop. And I ran into a friendly group of runners. And as I was passing by, I asked them, is this a group run? Is this a race? What is this? And he said, oh, it's a free 5K. You should join us.
I feel like if you say group of runners, then you're certainly implying that they're friendly people. So it's almost redundant to call them a friendly group of runners,
I like
right?
that. Yeah, because at least the people that we've come into contact with have been very friendly folk. And
so he's like, hey, we got this free run that you can just join. Why not?
So I just ran until the very start of the race because I obviously had 20 miles to get in and ran it with this group, and they were really friendly. They reached out to me afterwards. It was an amazing experience. I totally recommend jumping in, finding a group wherever you land. Like if you're traveling somewhere, look it up, search a group.
And that park run thing is like a big deal. They've got like 40 different events around North America. And so as we were inquiring, they don't have a park run in West Michigan. There's a couple on the east side of the state, but none in West Michigan. So if any of you out there are familiar with park run and you're thinking, yeah, I'd like to start a park run around here, we'd appreciate that because that sounds like it's a great thing to have going. And so we were talking to them about what it takes to get it started, and that's definitely something we need in this area. So this week, we wanted to dive into one of our long-standing passions within the running world, and that is track and field.
I love track.
So exciting. We love it. Now, we understand that not everybody in the world loves track. Some people criticize it for this, like, you just run in circles the whole time. Run fast, turn left. That's what they always say. But we wanted to make it exciting for you, those who wonder whether it could be. The answer is yes. And so to really, truly do that, we thought, you know what? Let's bring in Lewis Falland. Longtime friend, we've known him for years, as well as Gazelle Elite Pro. And let's be honest, this guy's passionate about track.
He definitely is. And he's a fantastic miler. He's gotten great times in the 5K too. And you should be keeping an eye out for him.
Absolutely. So sharing from some of his experiences and certainly some interesting and probably some uncommon things within track. And you'll enjoy all of that after our World of Running. Some of the latest news for the world of running begins with the Houston Marathon and Half Marathon. So it's the Chevron Houston Marathon and the Aramco Half Marathon. Great event. I think one of the highlights of the event, one of the things that just makes it stand out, is it is the last opportunity to qualify for the Olympic team trials.
And I think that's part of the reason why people love this event is because it's the last ditch effort. It brings the spirit of the sport. And I think people love to see the triumph.
Yeah, certainly that. And there was plenty of triumph. So kind of the overall picture of how successful the event was as the last chance qualifying. 44 new qualifiers between the men and the women for the Olympic team trials. So that's Americans running a time who had not yet done so since the end of 2016. Yeah. So that's awesome. Yeah. Now, for those who just did, They have kind of the highlight of the year for themselves because they hit that time and they can just ride that high straight through to the end of February when they've got to run another marathon. Well, some of these were half marathon qualifiers, but so big deal, big race. So I want to talk about the men's race just briefly, give you the highlights. First, 20 new qualifiers for the men, and 11 of those were in the full marathon, 9 of them in the half marathon. And that half marathon race, that was brutal.
It was so fast.
So fast. I mean, you don't see Americans running 61 in the half marathon regularly, and there was like a handful of them in that one race.
And women, There were quite a few of them. 24 new qualifiers, 18 in the marathon and 6 in the half. And I have to mention that half race because, again, like it was so fast. Sarah Hall was first for the American women, 9th place overall. She ran a PR of 1:08:58. It's been a huge year for her. This woman has been on fire. She's been winning a lot of marathons for the American women, and she is one of the contenders for the Olympics for USA.
Oh, yeah. In some ways, she's one of the favorites, if you will. Her qualifying time is one of the fastest, but she's also shown up in some of the biggest ways recently, and that's always kind of one of the things that people look for. It's not just who shows up at the trials with the fastest qualifier, because, for instance, you can qualify in 2017 and then get hurt and run nothing since then, or like in Galen Rupp's case, have surgery, and who knows what he's going to do when he shows up. So, things like that, who knows? But Sarah Hall's been on fire, and she's been on fire like every time she runs.
Yeah, and this PR is a great tune-up for the marathon. So getting to get that strong half in, I'm sure leads to her confidence.
So one more thing that we want to highlight from Houston Marathon is a little bit more personal for us, and it's a shout out to our friend Joe Nemec.
Yeah,
so, Joe, a little bit of backstory for you here before I give you this. I first met Joe because of the bridge run and Kyle Cutler. So we've had Kyle Cutler on before. He's talked about the bridge run. So this goes way back. But part of what bridge run has been for us is kind of like a connecting place with some athletes in a couple of different times and ways over the years. So Joe ran bridge run one time and reached out to Kyle after the race and was like, who's this Zach Ripley guy? I'd love to get in touch with him. And the reason he did that was because he just wanted to talk about like what is, at the time he was recently out of college and he was recently trying to decide whether he wanted to really pursue distance running post-college and what that would look like. And so he just wanted to talk to somebody about it. And it was just really kind of a cool thing. And we engaged at the time and then just maintained that communication and contact over the years. And, what a growth for Joe Nemec since that moment to now, where he ran 2:17 to be a first-time Olympic trials qualifier. And get this, he ran in Chicago this past fall. So when we were running Chicago, I actually raced with Joe. Our race plan was to run together, and we planned it out together. And unfortunately for both of us, we both kind of fell apart and neither of us hit it. And he finished just a couple minutes behind me at Chicago and then came back here in Houston only a few months later to run an almost 9-minute PR to run 2:17. That puts him 110th on the qualifications list. So his rank is 110th. And then in the race itself, it'll likely be a little bit further than that even, because not all of those 109 in front of him are necessarily declared.
Right.
So going from missing it from all of these years of just trying to decide, should I really chase this dream, and here to see it manifest and come together like that. Not only was he 110th, he was 9th in the race. He was the 4th American. Second American, thank you.
Yeah, he was second.
Yeah, he's second American, 9th in the race. What a day. And we've got to say it, because of all of this, we reached out to Joe and we're like, hey, man, can we feature you on the podcast? Can we actually do an interview and just capture this story? Because it is a story for the ages. So we will. You can hear that soon. We'll let you know.
Definitely. And we'll link to the Runner's World picture of him because it's amazing. The joy at the
greatest finish line picture.
Yeah. So he's kind of a big deal now. So we're happy we snagged him.
One more thing for us, Andy. What do you got?
So many of you have heard that Kipchoge is running the London Marathon. He will now be accompanied by Bekele.
Kenenisa Bekele. So we mentioned him previously.
Yeah.
He's the one who just missed Kipchoge's world record, legitimate world record, 2:01:41. So Kenenisa Bekele ran 2:01:43 in Berlin this year, missing it by 2 seconds. So clearly, if the two of them are both on their game on the same day in the same race, that's a great race.
Yeah, and I should mention that Bekele also has the world records in the 5K and the 10K.
He is still considered to be he is still considered to be by general consensus the greatest distance runner ever. Now, he's not the greatest marathoner ever. Kipchoge is definitely owning that title, but when the two of them match up, if they're on, like I said, that's going to be something. All right, that wraps it up for this week's news of running in the world of running, and we'll certainly have plenty more for you coming up next time.
We have Lewis Falland here helping us talk about track and field today. He's an Aussie living and training with Gazelle Elite in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He specializes in the mile and is a track and field expert. We're excited to have him on with us today. Thanks for coming on, Lewis.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And just a little extra note of background, because Lewis is a fellow teammate once upon a time as well. And so we have the personal connection touch. And what a thrill to be able to kind of watch your career like manifesting over the years too. I remember, because were you a freshman when I was a senior?
I was a baby freshman, red-shirted, as you were finishing up your fifth year of eligibility.
So when you see someone at in a sense the very beginning. Now remind me, Lewis, you had kind of just started running at that time, like officially training running.
Yeah, so I started training for a marathon my senior year of high school, just on a whim, and it didn't go well, as you could probably expect. Running about 40 miles a week, and one of those runs was like a 30-miler. That's pretty much how I constructed my entire training. I had no idea what was going on, but I really enjoyed the process. So I emailed the coach at our alma mater, and he basically just said, look, you can join up, but it's not going to be pretty, and if we don't like what we see, you can probably just ship on back home.
Oh, man.
So I remember a comment, and I have no idea who said this, but someone said, we've got this guy joining who decided he wanted to train for a marathon, but he hasn't really done any like team stuff or anything like that before. And it was like, we have no idea what to expect, but he's joining the team.
And he has a great accent, so.
Well, so yeah, the immediate thing though, so this is the point that I want to make is, I got to be with you for a brief period of time, but still remaining connected and getting to just kind of follow and, going from that kid that we just described there to, national champion, to breaking records, to all this kind of stuff. And then post-college to be able to find and solidify an opportunity to train and run professionally. Like that's really incredible, and it's just been awesome to see.
Yeah, thanks. I think what bound us together originally that first year is I was pretty quick to recognize that everybody around me was better than I was at what I was doing. And so especially the older the athlete on the team, the more I probably admired and the more I watched and tried to learn from. And so when I graduated, I actually I was pretty quick to seize the opportunity to join you then on Q Elite as well, the post-collegiate team that we were on at the time. It's just been super exciting to kind of stay connected really, really randomly along the way.
So even though we were there, how did the track process happen? Like, how did you become a miler?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about that. Other than I think I was bad at everything else, and it just turned out that the mile was something that was just long enough for me to. It just played to my strengths, I think. Really, I didn't touch the track very much until my sophomore year. I was injured pretty much throughout my entire freshman year. So I spent that summer when I went back home just mostly angry that I hadn't touched the track and that I still wasn't good. And I do find myself to be extremely competitive most of the time, and I just didn't like losing. So the next year I came back and I trained my butt off over that summer. And returned, and then I think our coach at the time was like, oh, you're actually half fit at the moment. Let's see what happens. And I think I ran a 5K somewhere in there, ran a couple rough cross-country 8Ks, and he was like, you know what, maybe we should try the mile. And that seemed to click right off the bat.
So speaking of the mile clicking, I want to tell a story, but I'm not going to really tell it well because I don't know the details as well as you do, but I'm going to give my impression, and then I want you to tell the story. So I got to witness this epic race that you ran at indoor national championships. And the thing that stood out to me the most is as you're coming around and it's like the final lap-ish, a little after the lap bell, and there's some guys trying to challenge. And I remember watching as you're just crushing this, and these guys are doing everything they can to try to get up on you. And there was a moment where the guy who was in second, just you could see the look on his face of just utter defeat. Like, I cannot beat this kid. and he just collapsed in every possible way, and just watching you run away from this guy. So tell us about that experience, about that race. What was that like for you?
Yeah. Oh man, that was back in 2014, and I think it's on YouTube somewhere. I think my dad still watches it when he's in a bad mood, perks him up. But it was essentially me and this one fella from England, actually. So it was an Australian and an Englishman going up against each other in Ohio for the NAIA National Championships. And I remember thinking, like, I think I'd rather lose to an American than to a Brit. And I remember the race plan was pretty specific. We knew that this guy just was going to outkick me. He just had more foot speed than I did. So the plan was to just go out really, really hard and try and just burn it out of him. So we went out super hot. I think we went out in, about like 60 seconds or something, the first 400, and we pretty much just hung in there. And it was just him and I, and we kind of split from the pack, and eventually in that last lap, he took the lead, actually. And I remember thinking, like, it's probably a good thing you're taking the lead right now because I'm cooked. But then in that last 200 or so, I was like, I lost last year. I was runner-up last year. I don't really want to lose again, and had just enough in me to kind of surge in front of him. And as I passed him, it was like something clicked in his head, I think, and he, his body responded in a negative way. And I think it's mostly lactic. Honestly, I think lactic acid just essentially locked him up, and he just ate the turf or ate the track. There was blood everywhere, and he kind of lunged himself across the finish line. What? I think he ended up placing 6th or something, which man. It was a bummer. He seemed like a nice guy and everything, but I just didn't really want to lose that day, I suppose.
So one of the points of our conversation today, we want to talk about track. We want to get into the sport of track and field through the lens of our experiences in the sport, and such like you just described, Lewis. And that's one of the things that I think is the most compelling dynamic for especially middle and distance runners on the track is I want that moment where 200 to go, half a lap on the outdoor track to go. We see this epic scene in all of the great races over the years where the contest is real and they're head to head and it's give and take, and then you just pour it on and you bury them. And every one of us wants that moment, that experience. And so many of the fans want to see that experience. Like, we're watching for that moment. That's exciting. And it just, as a spectator in that race, when I got to watch that happen, it was like all my track blood was just boiling, like, yes. But then just, from your experience to be able to make the choice and reap that reward, that's really exciting. So we want to get at track through that angle, through that lens. But I think before we try to get back to too many more of our stories at the moment, we'd love to give our audience kind of like the things you didn't know about track, like a little bit of the background and the history. So Andy, you've got some really interesting tidbits for us in some of your research on the sport.
I think a lot of you know that it started in Greece, and it was 11 centuries ago now. And this is interesting. North American running started after Australian running. Men started in 1839 in the U.S. and 1810 in Australia. Women in 1936, and for the Australian women, 1928. So that was actually a pretty big gap. Australian women are ahead, you guys. It's a little longer than ours, the history. And this is something I wanted to talk about because I think this will resonate with a lot of you in prizes, unique prizes. But the games, the prizes were a bit of a mystery, but some say that people would win olive branches or a tripod, and they're like a religious, like a little religious thing. So anyway, Lewis, my question for you is, what's the most interesting prize you've ever won?
I won a railroad spike one time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, you did that as well, Zach. We were on a relay team together, and it was, I actually don't know the origin of that at all, why it was a railroad spike, but we were just at the end given a railroad spike for winning this race as a team. I
don't think it'd be recommended to run with that railroad spike. Like, you're not supposed to run with scissors.
No, I'm not really sure what it was meant for, but
sentimental. Yeah,
sentimental. Maybe. There was a race recently over this last summer, actually. I didn't win it. I came second, but my teammate Bryce won it, and he got a little it was like a Tonka truck, and it just had like a little plaque on it that was like winner. And he dismantled it and was rolling around with it like a like a little kid. So
I won a wooden shoe once.
Oh.
Or was that me or was that you?
That was you.
I won a wooden shoe once. It must have been something like a race in Holland.
Yeah, something
where
Dutch.
that means something.
Yeah.
I want a pie. I feel like that's kind of common though. I want a pie. Oh, my favorite though. My favorite was winning chocolate at Cherry Republic in northern Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've won something similar. It was like a little goodie bag of those cherries and like pecans and some like maple syrup or something.
I'm all about the food prizes.
Yeah.
Andy, what else do you got for us? What are some of the historical interesting facts?
Yeah, so the prizes started at the very beginning. Everyone likes a prize. And then the other thing, and some of you may know this, but in early Greece, they ran naked. It's actually, of course, it was up to him. You'd still all be running naked.
Well, no, let's think about what they wore for clothing in early Greece. What else would they have been wearing with a robe?
That's true. I guess now it's like we running like lightweight spikes and split shorts to drop down weight. And back then it was like you're already wearing minimal like loincloths or togas or whatever that you may as well just strip it all off.
I thought this was interesting as I was doing some research that Australia has some great history with the mile. So you are a legacy of Australia in this way. So at the first modern Olympic Games in Athens in 1896, Australia's Edwin Flack won the 800 meters and 1500 meters. And those were Australia's first Olympic gold medals.
Right on. I'm fairly confident the second guy to ever break 4 was he not Australian? Yeah, well, we should probably look that up. I have a poster of him, so I really should know his name, but I'm fairly sure he's Australian. I got it signed by the third guy to ever break 4. I don't know his name either. Which just goes to show, isn't it crazy that the first guy to break 4 and then the second guy to break 4 were literally like a week apart. It was like 1 to 2 weeks apart. It's like if that guy just managed to break it first, like a couple weeks earlier, it'd be his name we're remembering, not Roger Bannister's. Pretty wild.
And actually, that's a great segue for talking about the 4-minute mile, because the reason that the mile has prevailed is that it started as a gambling race in England, and it survived to track and field when it switched to like the metric distances in the 1900s. It retained its popularity, and then the chase of the 4-minute mile was like the big thing in 1950 when it started becoming more possible. So my question for you, Lewis, is you're chasing the 4-minute barrier. Right? His PR is 4:01. Tell us the meaning and importance to you.
Oh man, yeah. It's 4:01 on the track, which is really what I count. I ran 4 flat on the roads.
Oh yes,
but I don't know if I necessarily count it, because it's like, come on, you're gonna measure a road to the 10th of a second.
It
kind
was
of deal?
measured.
I'd hope so. To me, it's just something that I've had in my head that I want to do for so long now that it seems like I'd almost be letting myself down to just not care about that anymore. I actually don't know why I hold it so dear. It could be because, tracing it way back, but my dad is a big track fan, and he's actually who definitely got me into running years and years ago. There's like a picture of me in like the local newspaper when I was like 3, holding hands with my dad going on a run. Got like a little race bib on and stuff. So it was always my dad who just like fostered that in me, and anytime he certainly never pushed me into it at all, but he recognized that when I cared about it, and he just encouraged that. And I think as soon as he and I both realized, like, oh man, this is something I really would like to do, and something that I think I could be good at, we both kind of dove into that history of the sport a little bit together, and sub 4 was just like this. It's just like this iconic. It's almost like it seemed so unattainable to humans for so long that when it happened, it was groundbreaking. I mean, this was like universal headlines.
Yeah.
And to think that I can essentially take that crazy legacy that I've been looking up to for so long, and I can actually implement it in my own life, and I can do the same thing that these legends did and so many other legends failed to do, is just cool. Like, it's cool to be able to say that. I don't know the exact number now because it's updated regularly, but I mean, there's literally under 5,000 people ever in human history have ever been able to do it, and it'd just be cool to join that list, I guess.
And at one time, the 4-minute barrier was like Kipchoge's 2-hour.
Right.
You know, so like you would be part of that.
Right.
You know, part of the breaking the barrier, finding out what's possible for humans.
Yeah, and people thought that he'd cross the line in under 4 minutes and then just combust or just like die, you know. And when he didn't, it opened up, it unlocked human ability and potential in everybody's mind, not just the people in that stadium. And I think it's so cool to be able to say maybe one day I can join that club.
So besides the mile, what other events do you like?
I like the 5K as much as one can like the 5K. It's a painful, brutal event, but it seems to be the closest thing that I could find some success at. I used to steeplechase back in college.
Do you love the steeplechase?
I can't say I love it. My fibula certainly doesn't love it.
Oh, okay.
That thing shattered once or twice throughout a race. So I think it's a beautiful event, and I like watching it.
For any particular reason?
Oh, I think there's some athletes out there, one female in particular, that I really enjoy watching run the steeplechase, but...
We won't tell Leah.
No. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess I'm interested in all things track, except for the 800.
So there's a great memory that I have. I don't know if it's a great memory for you. It probably should be a worse memory for me, but I don't know. Not terribly long ago, running a 5K with you at Grand Valley, and it was basically just the two of us, and we were the strategy, trade off laps and all that kind of thing. It was like every other lap, every 800 or so.
Yeah, something like that.
And I remember that moment, and we all feel this moment where it's like, it's my turn again, and I don't think I've got it. Like I can't let Lewis down. But I didn't have it, and I remember I had to say the words. I can't do it, and you had to kind of just take off and finish it yourself. And
the first
sorry,
2
man.
miles. No. The first 2 miles. It actually keeps me up at night, Zach, all the time. The first 2 miles, I remember thinking like, I don't know if I can do it. So one of us had to give eventually, I'm sure.
Yep.
So part of the purpose of this episode is to inform people about track and field, because there'll be a lot of listeners that have never participated in a track and field event. So let's talk a little bit about race strategies, because they're much different when you're on the track than when you're running like a marathon. So will you walk us through some of your typical race strategies? Yeah.
So a strategy that stands out that was tried to use against me actually is immediately what comes to mind. It was a local race here in Grand Rapids. It was Reed's Lake 5K just this last year, and my teammate and friend Woy and I were competing in this 5K, and there was a handful of guys, probably about 3 or 4 guys, and it was just us in this front pack. And I remember looking back at one point, and there was no one else really that we had to be concerned about, but it was these 4 guys. And one by one, we all started slowly dropping back until it was just Woy, myself, and one other guy. And this was in the dying kind of like half mile of this race. And we really started to look at each other like, something's going to happen here pretty soon. And there was an aid station with 800 meters to go on the road, the aid station. And this guy was running next to us, and he kind of slowed a little bit, and he reached out to go to the aid station. And so we kind of, because we were behind him, slowed with him, and he reached out, and then he faked it. He pulled his arm back in and started sprinting as hard as he could. And Woy and I look at each other like, oh man, I guess this is happening. So we had to chase him down, and that was like a strategy that is super uncommon, and it's like, it probably because most of the time it doesn't work, but that actually worked on us, and it threw us off a bit because we just weren't expecting it.
I have never heard of that. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because I know the category of runner you're talking about here, and they're notorious for it. These are the guys who they'll come to these races and they'll be able to win these kinds of races and such. But they're going all over the place trying to kind of target the mid-level. There's some money in the race, but it's not like you're going to be racing against a field of professionals across the board.
Yeah.
And they've got a lot of tricks up their sleeves.
Yeah. It's all mind games. That's all tactics are. I remember running an 8K in college, and I knew going into this race that it was really me and one other guy that I needed to truly be concerned about. And we take off, and he's ahead of me, and I kind of pull up to him, and we separate ourselves. And within the first mile, he looked over at me, and he said, "Hey, man, what's your name?" I said, and I'm breathing hard already. It's a mile into an 8K.
Did you forget?
Yeah.
The brain cells were all gone.
Yeah. I said, "Oh, it's Lewis." And he's like, "Oh man, nice. Where are you from?" And I was like, "Are we seriously doing this right now?" But I didn't want to not answer him, because then that makes me seem like I was more fatigued or a little bit weaker than he was. And he ended up asking me what my 8K PR is, and and finally I stopped talking, and by the second mile he dropped me, because it just was in my head that like, this guy doesn't even care. And he went on to smash me in that race as a result.
So in so many ways, so you mentioned the road strategy, you mentioned the cross-country strategy. There's an interesting dynamic that happens with the track where we often describe it as you can't hide on the track. You can't really pull much and get away with it. I think, the most common thing that people, in a sense, get away with is they just go hard and people don't think they can handle it, so they don't go with them. And then they end up winning because they actually could handle it. But that doesn't happen very often. Aside from that, what are the unexpected things that people do in a race on the track?
I'm always surprised when people throw in spontaneous surges, and that's really popular, but it's so not my style that I still to this day often don't know how to react, and it's for that exact reason. It's because you think in your head, like, okay, if you've studied up on the field, for example, you look ahead and you think like, okay, so who is that guy, and is he that good? Like, is he just feeling really good and he's just going to blitz me right now, or is he being dumb and is he going to come back? And maybe for that reason, I don't tend to do that myself. I like running a more consistent race, and I don't like putting in these intentional efforts that are risky. I'm not a risky racer at all. Those tactics kind of blow my mind a little bit. Aside from that, I think it was actually you might have taught me this, Zach, back in college. And I remember you taught me it out of nowhere too. There was no real context. I think maybe we'd kind of bumped each other on a run or something, and you said, "Hey, just so you know, if you get in a race and it's getting a bit physical on the track, and you demonstrated a very specific move to get somebody out of your business, and it's essentially you just put your hand on their hip and give them a little shove if they're right next to you, and in that instance they have no choice but you can't fight that. Like, your center of gravity just kind of gets thrown out of the way." And I remember I've always wanted to use that, and I've never been able to.
I wouldn't do it in a championship race.
No.
You never know who's watching and deciding whether that's legal.
Yes.
And that would only be like a retaliation that you'd use, like if someone's like pushing you, right?
No, not at all. That's a proactive.
That is
I don't like hearing that.
That's you knock someone out of the race that you think is dangerous, You get dirty.
Yeah, the physical side is always a fascination because clearly much is tolerated in track under the spirit of it's tight quarters, everyone's running hard, and people collide. But you hear the stories, and I don't know if I've ever heard someone claim it, but you hear the stories that like people are intentionally throwing an elbow to the ribs, they're intentionally trying to get right up on somebody and get their feet on the business, and do people do that on purpose, or is it just because it's just so tight? It's just...
I really don't think so. I have to believe that there's no one out there who is... You have to be a certain kind of person, I think, and I just don't think that kind of person is drawn to the pure sport of track and field. Maybe that sounds a little arrogant to say, and it's speaking for a lot of people, but I really don't think that your average runner at whatever level is trying to go in there and you're in a sport that is obviously a non-contact sport, and so if there is contact, you got to assume that it's accidental, and you can still get upset about it. But I've been in races, we've all been in races where someone falls, but no one gets up and at the end of the race is, throwing fists. Although there are some races that have been there.
There's the notorious, I don't know what level this race was, but the two Frenchmen in 1500 or steeple.
That's right.
One of those two.
Oh man, I forgot about that.
Yeah, fists were thrown, fisticuffs right at the finish line.
I just watched the video recently of Haile Gebrselassie kind of out kicking someone in the last 50 meters, and the guy, instead of allowing him to beat him, threw a punch in the back of his head as he's passing him. And so Haile kind of just lunges over the line, and the crowd goes, "Oh!" And that guy probably didn't claim second in the end.
Might have been the last time that guy raced internationally.
Yeah, I would hope so.
So there's kind of an interesting thought that goes into track and field where it's what does it take to be a high jumper, or what kind of athlete is a pole vaulter, 1500 meter runner, all those kinds of things. And there's certainly ones that seem to be quite distinct. When you look at the highest level in, for example, the high jump, not only do they tend to be quite tall, they're not all tall, but most, they have almost like this spring-like look to them. The lankiness, and their body can like bend and move in interesting ways, and they create that spring motion when they jump. So clearly to be a high-level high jumper, there's a dynamic there that... So what about in some of the things that you've experienced? Do you see, especially in like the middle and distance running types of things, do you see that like this is the kind of athlete who seems to do this thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think historically I've always assumed that at the higher end of things you're going to see the same type of athlete across the board. But then when you really get into it, you start seeing there is really nothing that differentiates the best of the best. We've seen athletes at the highest level who are outstanding 10K runners who are 6'5" and like 190 pounds, and they just.
Are you talking about Chris Zielinski right now?
Yeah, it's Zielinski namely, but there's been one or two other, like even Craig Mottram over like 5,000 meters. These guys and women who just aren't your stereotypical athlete. Like, who is that? I'm trying to think. Who is that athlete? She was the first one to put spikes on the bottom of like a Vaporfly for the 10K. And she went from triathlon. She was like I think she was gold medalist in triathlon.
Gwen Jorgensen.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
On the tip of my tongue. Someone like that who like you look at her running the 10K and she's not necessarily built like a stereotypical 10K runner, but she gets in there and tears it up. You even look on our Gazelle Elite team on the men's side. You look at Bryce Bradley, who is a Grand Valley alum. He's a sub 14 minute 5K guy. And he's at least a head and a half shorter than I am. And then you look at Woy Mark, my other teammate, who's a sub 4 miler, both extremely talented in pretty similar events. And Woy's, another head and a half taller than I am and weighs less than me, Mm-hmm. So, and then I'm smack bang in the middle. It's just a weird kind of, I think that's part of what I love about track is you can't look at and point at anyone and say like, you're not going to be that good because we've seen worse.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We were talking about earlier, you can't really hide on the track. And in the same sense, you can't put like a label. Well, so what I'm really trying to get at here is before the gun goes off, you can't look at the start line and say that one's going to win that race. Most of the time, there's certain individuals historically who you probably should bet on if you're going to bet. But really, it's that whole idea that it's anyone's race at any time. And kind of like that, and I love that. It makes it exciting. It also seems to be one of the reasons why people lack some of the energy around other sports, where you don't know if your runner is going to get dead last or win by a minute, and those kinds of things. Like it's really just a hard moment because it's anyone's race.
That I often think on this topic, I think too, there's this meet that's held in Australia. It's called the Bay Sheffield, and it's essentially it's a local race, but it's held around like a really oval shaped track with bank turns, just a weird kind of like really, really sharp oval. I think it's about 370 meters around or something. Like it's an odd distance. It's like 5.5 laps or something to a mile, something strange. But they hold this meet and it's like a grass stadium essentially. And people, it's free to attend. It's very, very friendly to the public. And athletes from all over Australia come because the prize money is amazing. The 120-meter sprint is actually the highlight event, and I think the winner walks away with $20,000.
Whoa!
But the big catch on this meet is that unlike any other track meet where you all start on the same start line, it's handicapped, so you enter seed times leading up to it, and the committee does like really extensive research on exactly like where your training's at, and are you actually capable of running this time, and then they seed you and they set you back based on how fast you are or how fit you are at the time. So there's like a 1,600 meter race, and so if you are the top guy, you're actually running 1,600 meters, but you're trying to chase down guys who are running 1,400 meters.
Wow!
And so the idea behind it all is that you're all finishing like it's like a photo finish between like 12 different athletes. And it just speaks to that whole, like, let's make track exciting, essentially. And you cannot know who's going to win these races. But you got people all around betting on it. There's drinks everywhere, and people are just throwing coins everywhere. And there's commentators.
See, we need to do that in the U.S.
Yeah, I know.
That's our problem, right?
One of our problems.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite track event to watch?
I am a big fan of the 800, actually, to watch. I hate running it myself. But I just think it's it's like a short story, like a really, really exciting short story where it's like you basically, as a rule of thumb, most 800 runners know that you probably get a max of like 2 moves. You have 2 opportunities to like change the race in your favor. And if you botch one of them, you're done. You're just not going to win. And there's just so many unspoken rules that everyone's trying to obey, but everything's happening so fast to where you can't necessarily count on yourself to obey these rules, and it's just chaos. It's just a total cluster out there, and I love that.
Yeah.
Throw a field event in the mix for sure. I love watching high jump. I think high jump is like it's almost like primitive. Like, let's just see how high we can jump, and whoever jumps the highest wins, like, which really is track as a whole. But I like high jump particularly because you can physically see when the athlete is approaching the bar how much higher above their heads it is. And if you just know how how tall someone is, you're jumping, feet over your own body height, and it's phenomenal. It's fascinating.
I like the pole vault quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that risky thing too, because like I get super invested when I'm watching it, and they go so high up. What is it, like 20 feet? I think it's over 20 feet is the world record. Oh, yeah. But Sam Kendricks, when he won bronze at the 2016 Olympic Games, that was really exciting, and he's been a 2-time world champion. Quite incredible. But I actually did find I'm like full of all these really random facts. So the pole vault, when it started in Europe, men would actually use the pole to cross canals full of water. So it's more like a distance vault than it was a high vault.
Let's bring that back. I like that.
Yeah, it's like the steeplechase of pole vault.
Yeah.
Well, and as we know, so much of what makes track and field just kind of a compelling thing is that it's almost all based off of something that like you want to be able to do that well in a more primitive society. Like it's important for me to be able to jump high. If I need to run and jump over walls when I'm being chased by
or throw a javelin.
Evil beasts or throw a javelin 100 feet and impale something, and it's fun. It's fascinating in that sense.
And I think that brings us to a question that I wanted to ask you, and that's, why should someone want to spectate?
I think it is difficult. Like our old coach, for example, has two kids, and one is just a total track head. She is just as competitive as they come, and she loves going to track meets, and she's like the loudest person that's ever cheered for me. Absolutely phenomenal. And then you have their older son who just hates going to track meets, and he just cannot fathom why anyone would want to sit there and watch. So I think a little bit of it is, just someone's inherent tendency to support one sport rather than another. Like some people love football and hate golf, and vice versa. I think there is a little bit of that. For me, the beauty of track is its simplicity, and at least we'd like to think it's purity, if you subtract out all the controversial stuff. But I just love the idea of we're really just a bunch of cavemen and cavewomen just like trying to be the best we can at the most primitive skills. I think that's so cool. And like, instead of making up all these like crazy rules about it, like let's keep it so simple and just see who the best in the world are at. I think that's fascinating. Yeah.
And I think as children too, we have this desire to jump as high as we can jump, to run as fast as we can run. I see that in our sons already. And when I think about a lot of the other sports, which I love to watch as well, I think it kind of boils down to like what you said, the purity of it. We're going to watch, come at 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo, who the fastest people in the world are at these events, who can jump the highest in the entire world, billions of people. Yeah. And I find that extremely exciting.
And the objectivity of it as well. There's no judges, there's no referees that you can rely on necessarily. It really is just don't punch somebody in the back of the head as they're finishing, and then you can decide who is the best in the world at your specific event.
Yeah, don't use that railroad spike to get after anybody.
There's a strategy. Yeah. So really appreciate, Lewis, your contributions to the conversation. And I think one of the things that, always makes this so compelling is when you can experience it, you see, and it's kind of an emotional thing. You feel a level of attachment to something. And so I think, trying to support that idea for our audience members who haven't experienced track, to be able to hear from your experiences and get a taste for what does track feel like. And that's That's great. So thank you for sharing that. Definitely appreciate your time. Andy, what do you got for us?
Well, I was just thinking about how people can learn more about track, and I was thinking about Gazelle Elite and some of the events that you do, reaching out to the community. We'll link to that page so people can connect. Do you have anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, please do. So Gazelle Elite is a team sponsored by Gazelle Sports. You can follow us on Instagram if you don't mind me plugging here at Gazelle Elite Racing. We do cover the progress of our individual athletes, including one or two that have been featured on this podcast. But we also play a big role in the young athlete community in West Michigan specifically. So we make pretty public appearances at a lot of the high school meets. We help organize those. And Gazelle Sports, of course, has a massive hand in just the active well-being of the Michigan community, or that's at least their goal. So yeah, please like and support that, and we're always happy to have you into our store or come and have a run with us.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Lou.
Thank you for having me, guys. Lovely talking to you.
So if you didn't notice, we love talking about running here, but specifically track and field holds kind of like a corner of our hearts in a way that other aspects of running don't necessarily. And I think a large part of just the opportunity here to talk with Lewis is because hopefully you heard that too, that passion that he also has. And, we've got the relationship there over the years with him. And so we just love to catch up a little bit and, retell and relive some of the good stories. That's all fun and games. But man, track and field, what a sport.
If you want to feel that like raw joy that children do when they run as fast as they can and have like new shoes, we can still do that as adults. And I think that that's something that's really special about running. Yeah,
you heard Lewis say it, just like what makes track, kind of in his mind, what elevates it in some ways, that simplicity. And I would agree. I love to run cross country. I don't really do that much anymore, but I certainly love to run on the roads. That's the kind of thing that you see the most of, and there's so many great events out there. But then when you get on the track, it's just like you and every step that you're running, and there's not much else to think about. And some people hate that. I will say, some people hate that.
I love it. I love the track.
It's awesome.
Mm-hmm. And actually, as we had this conversation, I'm like super geeked to try to get back on the track. I love watching it, but I also love participating. So
that's kind of the frustration of being, like, in a sense, people who love things like that, but then do something like the marathon, because there's just not a lot of space in marathoning for track running.
Yeah. But I have to say, watching it, you don't have to be training for that to be able to enjoy watching the best in the world compete. And we'll certainly be able to do that this year as the Olympics are coming up. The trials will be coming up for our U.S. track and field. So we will keep you all in the loop when it comes to track and field.
And definitely the events that come up here and there that are like community-based events. Most of track is a team-oriented thing. It's college, it's high school, or it's like, just straight up professional. But there are some community-based events, and some of you are aware of those, and I know a few of them are connected to things like what Run GR does and some of that other stuff with Gazelle. And really, we would love to make sure that you know what's coming up, because if this is the kind of thing that you like to try to do too, there's not a lot of opportunities. We want to grab it when we can.
Yeah, and let us know if you hear of anything. So drop us a line at AtoZrunning.